Captain Marcus Rodriguez rolled his wheelchair through the aerospace engineering classroom doorway, immediately sensing the shift in student attention from their phones to his disability. The teaching assistant Sarah Chun approached with that familiar tone he recognized from countless speaking engagements, the one that assumed inspiration over expertise. She spoke slowly, as if addressing a child rather than a decorated combat pilot. "We're so honored to have someone share their personal journey with overcoming challenges," she announced to the class of 20 engineering students. Marcus noticed how she emphasized personal journey while completely omitting his technical credentials or combat experience. The students whispered among themselves, clearly categorizing him as another motivational speaker rather than the former F-16 Fighting Falcon pilot with advanced degrees in aerospace engineering and flight dynamics. One student near the back made a comment about how universities always brought in these inspiration talks instead of real technical content. Sarah nodded sympathetically toward Marcus as she continued her introduction, explaining how they would hear about perseverance and adapting to life changes. She carefully avoided mentioning anything about his 127 combat missions or his contributions to current F-16 emergency procedures. Marcus began discussing F-16 flight envelope parameters, explaining how the Fighting Falcon's fly-by-wire system managed control authority at high angles of attack beyond 26 degrees. A student in the front row interrupted with barely concealed skepticism, asking if his knowledge was still current since he obviously couldn't fly anymore. The question hit like a physical blow, implying his paralysis somehow erased years of aerospace engineering expertise. Sarah Chun quickly intervened, suggesting they focus on his inspiring personal story rather than getting bogged down in technical details that might be outdated. Marcus attempted to explain the relationship between center of gravity and pitch stability in modern fighter aircraft, but another student openly checked his phone while muttering about needing real technical content for their exams. The systematic dismissal continued as Marcus described specific flight control algorithms, only to have Chun redirect the conversation toward overcoming adversity. One particularly bold student near the window asked if he even understood current digital flight control systems, since his accident obviously happened before the latest upgrades. The harassment escalated when students began whispering about whether someone in a wheelchair could possibly grasp the physical demands of modern aviation engineering. Marcus wheeled toward the classroom's F-16 flight simulator, hoping to demonstrate actual flight dynamics calculations rather than endure more condescending inspiration talk. The students immediately began snickering as he positioned his wheelchair at the control station, one loudly wondering how someone who couldn't walk could possibly operate complex flight controls. Sarah Chun stepped forward with fake concern, suggesting he might be more comfortable just talking theoretically instead of handling equipment he wasn't familiar with. A student near the back pulled out his phone to record, announcing to his friends that this would be hilarious to post online. The mockery intensified as Marcus adjusted the simulator settings, explaining how he would demonstrate flat spin recovery procedures using specific angle of attack parameters. Another student commented that disabled people should stick to what they know instead of pretending to understand pilot requirements. Chin openly questioned whether he should be touching expensive university equipment, implying his wheelchair somehow made him incompetent with technology. The humiliation reached its peak when a primary student volunteer entered the simulator cockpit for what should have been a routine training exercise, but the system immediately malfunctioned as warning alarms began sounding throughout the classroom. The simulator spun violently out of control as the student pilot inside fought against forces that shouldn't exist in a training scenario. Red warning lights flashed across multiple system displays, while hydraulic pressure alarms screamed through the classroom. Sarah Chun frantically pressed emergency shutdown buttons that failed to respond, her face pale as she realized the standard safety protocols weren't working. The trapped student called out in panic as the simulated aircraft entered an unrecoverable flat spin at 12,000 feet, the spinning motion making him increasingly nauseous and disoriented. Chun shouted for backup instructors while other students backed away from the malfunctioning equipment. Marcus quietly observed the technical readouts, noting they were applying incorrect recovery procedures for the specific angle of attack parameters displayed on the instruments. He called out that they needed to reduce power and apply opposite rudder first. But Chun dismissed his suggestion while continuing her failed attempts at conventional recovery. The simulator's artificial horizon spun wildly as airspeed indicators fluctuated beyond normal parameters. Marcus tried again to explain that the recovery sequence required specific timing based on F-16 emergency protocols, but his technical expertise was ignored as everyone assumed his wheelchair meant he lacked current knowledge. 3 backup instructors rushed into the classroom, but couldn't solve the simulator malfunction as the student pilot's distress calls grew more urgent. The spinning motion had continued for over 2 minutes, causing severe spatial disorientation that threatened to make him physically ill or unconscious. Professor Jenkins arrived and attempted manual override procedures, but the flight control systems remained locked in the deadly spin cycle with altitude, decreasing rapidly towards simulated ground impact. Standard emergency shutdown protocols failed completely as the simulator's computer systems ignored all external commands. The trapped student began showing signs of motion sickness, his voice weakening as he struggled against the relentless spinning forces. Marcus wheeled closer to analyze the technical displays, immediately identifying the specific hydraulic system failures that others had missed in their panic. He pointed out that the flight control computers were interpreting contradictory sensor data, but his observations were dismissed as theoretical speculation from someone with outdated knowledge. The situation deteriorated further as the student pilot's responses became increasingly sluggish, indicating dangerous levels of disorientation that could lead to complete unconsciousness. Marcus realized they had less than 60 seconds before emergency medical intervention would be required to extract the pilot from the malfunctioning cockpit. The student pilot's voice became barely audible as nausea from continuous spinning overwhelmed his ability to respond coherently to instructor commands. Emergency services were being called for immediate medical extraction, but Marcus knew they didn't have enough time before the pilot lost consciousness completely. With 20 seconds remaining before total system failure, Marcus positioned his wheelchair directly at the primary control station and began implementing advanced F-16 emergency recovery procedures he had developed during combat operations. His hands moved across the controls with absolute precision as he called out specific technical parameters that stunned the instructors. Power reduction to 60% thrust, opposite rudder application at 2-second intervals, elevator input coordinated with yaw dampener override. The classroom fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of the simulator as Marcus continued his methodical recovery sequence. He explained each control input using exact F-16 specifications while monitoring airspeed, altitude, and angle of attack with the calm authority of someone who had performed these procedures under actual enemy fire. Sarah Chun and the backup instructors watched in growing amazement as the simulator began responding to his expert commands, something their conventional training had failed to achieve. Marcus executed perfect flat spin recovery using calculations that demonstrated mastery of advanced flight dynamics beyond anything the instructors had witnessed. He adjusted angle of attack to precisely 14 degrees while coordinating rudder inputs with elevator control, explaining the aerodynamic principles behind each movement with technical accuracy that left everyone speechless. The simulator responded immediately to his expert commands, smoothly transitioning from unrecoverable spin to controlled flight as he narrated specific F-16 emergency procedures. Airspeed stabilized at 250 knots, altitude maintained at 8,000 feet, with all flight control surfaces responding normally to his inputs. Students and faculty watched in stunned silence as Marcus continued explaining advanced fly-by-wire system interactions, demonstrating comprehensive knowledge of digital flight controls that exceeded their textbook understanding. He described how the F-16's flight control computer processed sensor data through multiple redundant pathways, using terminology that revealed intimate familiarity with actual combat aircraft systems. The student pilot's voice returned to normal as spatial disorientation disappeared, his relief audible as the spinning motion ceased completely. Marcus calmly guided the simulated aircraft through standard recovery procedures while explaining each technical step with precision that proved his expertise was current, comprehensive, and battle-tested. Marcus successfully brought the simulator to stable flight and executed a textbook landing while the student pilot recovered from his ordeal, breathing normally for the first time in minutes. He explained each technical step using authentic aerospace engineering terminology that demonstrated knowledge far beyond instructor level, discussing how modern F-16 flight control computers managed hydraulic pressure distribution through primary and backup systems. Sarah Chun stared at the control displays in disbelief as Marcus described advanced digital flight control algorithms with the casual expertise of someone who had helped design them. The students realized their massive error in judgment as he continued explaining fly-by-wire system redundancies, backup hydraulic circuits, and emergency power distribution protocols with precision that revealed intimate knowledge of actual combat aircraft. Professor Jenkins approached the simulator controls with newfound respect, asking technical questions about flight envelope protection systems that Marcus answered with detailed explanations of angle of attack limiters and force management protocols. The classroom atmosphere transformed completely as everyone understood they were witnessing genuine technical mastery from someone whose wheelchair had blinded them to his extraordinary qualifications. Marcus discussed current F-16 Block 52 avionics upgrades and digital terrain mapping systems, proving his knowledge was not only current but cutting-edge. Air Force Colonel Patricia Hayes entered the classroom followed by 35 Air Force Academy officers in full dress blue uniforms, their polished brass and ribbons creating an imposing presence that commanded immediate attention from every student and instructor. She approached Marcus directly and addressed him with clear respect as Captain Rodriguez, call sign Viper, explaining they had arrived for the scheduled Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony honoring his heroic actions during Operation Steel Eagle in Syria. The students and faculty listened in stunned silence as Colonel Hayes detailed his combat record of 127 missions, his role in developing current F-16 emergency procedures, and his sacrifice while saving fellow pilots under heavy enemy fire. She explained how Marcus had successfully completed a dangerous rescue mission while his aircraft suffered catastrophic damage, managing to extract 2 wounded pilots before ejecting from his crippled F-16 at dangerously low altitude. The ejection that saved lives had cost him the use of his legs, but preserved his brilliant aerospace engineering mind that continued contributing to pilot safety protocols. Sarah Chen's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized the magnitude of her condescending treatment toward a decorated combat hero whose technical expertise exceeded everyone in the room combined. The 35 officers stood at attention, demonstrating the profound respect Marcus commanded within the military aviation community. Colonel Hayes presented Marcus with his Distinguished Flying Cross while explaining his technical contributions to current F-16 flight systems development, including the emergency procedures that had just saved the student pilot from serious injury. The students learned he held advanced degrees in aerospace engineering and aeronautical systems from MIT, with doctoral research focused on digital flight control optimization and emergency recovery protocols. His published papers on flat-spin aerodynamics were required reading at the Air Force Test Pilot School, and his combatus procedures have become standard training protocols for all F-16 squadrons worldwide. Sarah Chun approached Marcus with visible shame, offering a public apology for her condescending treatment and acknowledging her complete failure to recognize his extraordinary qualifications and expertise. The university administration witnessed the ceremony and immediately realized their profound error in presenting him as an inspirational speaker rather than the technical expert and decorated combat veteran he actually was. Dean Morrison stepped forward to formally apologize for the university's inadequate introduction and the disrespectful treatment Marcus had endured from students and faculty alike. Colonel Hayes announced that Marcus had been instrumental in developing the enhanced flight training simulators currently used by Air Force Academy, making his expertise with the classroom equipment both extensive and authoritative. The students who had mocked Marcus faced immediate academic consequences for their disrespectful behavior toward a decorated combat veteran and technical expert whose qualifications exceeded their instructors. Dean Morrison announced mandatory sensitivity training for all engineering students, emphasizing that physical disabilities never diminish intellectual capabilities or professional expertise. Sarah Chun received formal disciplinary action for unprofessional conduct and was required to complete additional training on working with disabled veterans and recognizing authentic technical expertise regardless of physical appearance. The university revised its guest speaker protocols to ensure proper introduction of credentials and technical backgrounds, preventing future incidents of qualified experts being mischaracterized as inspirational speakers. Professor Jenkins offered Marcus a permanent position as professor of aerospace engineering with full authority over the flight simulation program and emergency procedure development. The offer included complete accessibility modifications to laboratory facilities and recognition of his combat experience as equivalent to decades of civilian research experience. Colonel Hayes explained that Marcus would bring unique practical knowledge from actual F-16 combat operations, making him invaluable for training future aerospace engineers and military pilots. The 35 Air Force officers demonstrated their continuing respect by formally requesting Marcus consider developing advanced flight training protocols for the Air Force Academy using his combatist expertise. Marcus accepted the professorship and immediately began implementing enhanced flight training protocols based on his combat experience, transforming the aerospace engineering program into one of the most respected in the nation. The university invested in complete accessibility upgrades for all technical facilities, demonstrating that physical limitations never diminish intellectual capabilities or professional expertise. His first official lecture drew overflow crowds of students eager to learn from a genuine technical expert whose knowledge came from actual F-16 combat operations rather than textbook theory alone. The flight simulator received comprehensive upgrades, incorporating his emergency procedure protocols, ensuring future pilots would benefit from hard-earned combat knowledge that had saved countless lives during military operations. Marcus established a wheelchair advocacy program within the engineering department, mentoring disabled students and proving that technical excellence transcends physical limitations through dedication and expertise. Colonel Hayes returned regularly to observe his classes, often bringing Air Force Academy cadets to learn advanced flight dynamics from someone who had applied these principles under actual enemy fire. The students who had initially mocked him became his most dedicated pupils, having learned that true expertise often comes disguised in unexpected forms. Marcus's legacy extended far beyond the classroom as his combatist procedures became standard training protocols used by military and civilian flight schools worldwide, saving lives through knowledge earned in the crucible of actual combat.